you. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Alex, for the opportunity and for the help. Thank all of you for being here. My name is Robert Spindler from Austria. I'm here on an Erwin Schrödinger Fellowship from the Austrian Science Fund, and I'm interested in so-called broadside ballads. And Oxford is really the place to be when it comes to broadside ballads, because it's the place with the most broadside ballads, as the Bodleian libraries house several collections which in sum comprise more than 30,000 items from 1500 to the 19th century. What is a broadside ballad? Well, a broadside ballad is a ballad, so a short verse text, actually a song, but printed on one side of a single sheet of paper. And early modern broadside ballads could be read, they could be sung, they could be heard for the illiterate. They could also be looked at. As you can see, they are all illustrated, most of them are illustrated with crude woodcuts. And they were really a kind of versatile mass medium in early modern England. And they covered many different topics, took on a variety of forms. And for example, there were narrative ballads that continued a very an old oral tradition. There were also news ballads that communicated recent events. There were tragic and comic ballads. There were political and historical ballads. There were religious and bawdy ballads. There were literary and sensational ballads, and so on. Part of my interest in broadside ballads actually has to do with these different subtypes and categories of ballads, but I'm also interested in the characters or the figures portrayed in these, and in particular in outsider figures, non-normative figures, transgressive figures, but also minorities and marginalized characters. This includes criminals, outlaws, witches, pirates, but also religious and ethnic minorities, transvestites, disobedient daughters, and so on. Here is a small selection of such ballads that are about such figures or characters. And this here does not look like it, but it's actually the most spectacular item of this small selection. It is one of the oldest printed ballads. It's actually the oldest printed ballad in the Bodleian libraries. And it is also one of the earliest, it's a copy of the earliest surviving printed text on Robin Hood. Robin Hood is the prototypical ballad hero. There are at least 24 broadside ballads about Robin Hood, and all the popular stories about Robin Hood that we know today stem from the ballad genre. So I'm glad that we can have a look at it here. It's obviously not a typical broadside ballad because it was printed on several pages, but it is a sort of a precursor of the genre. The next one is about a witch, or a supposed witch. It is a different type of narrative ballad that claims to report a factual event. Although it is sounds rather improbable, it is about a mother and her two sons who are accused of having murdered their master. They are executed. They are sentenced to death and executed, but not before the mother says the master is actually not dead and he will return within 7 years' time. And he does. And when he returns, he reports that the mother, through witchcraft, transported him to a Mediterranean island where he woke up, was captured by Turkish pirates, kept as a slave for a couple of months, and then returned to England. And the ballad is called Truth Brought to Light. So that's how truth is brought to light in early modern England. The next song, ballad, also has to do, and I'm interested in Mediterranean piracy because I wrote my doctoral thesis about these so-called Barbary captivity narratives by these returning slaves or captives. The next ballad is about such a Mediterranean pirate, an actual historical figure, Jack Ward, or sometimes called John Ward, who lived from 1553 to 1662. And he was an English privateer turned pirate who became a so-called Barbary pirate, converted to Islam, and then captured English ships from his bases in Tunis in North Africa. And he perfectly embodies this contradictory element of fascination and condemnation of the typical ballad hero or some ballad heroes. Some believe, by the way, that Jack Ward was the inspiration for Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean merchandise franchise. Next, we have the Bristol Bridegroom, which is an example of another very popular type of ballad, which Diane Dugard called warrior women ballads. And the story is always the same. A couple, a female and a male lover, are separated, mostly because the father of the woman sends the man away as a sailor on a ship. And then the woman dresses up as a male sailor and follows her sweetheart. And in the end, they are usually reunited. And what I found interesting in this example, there are many, many of these ballads, and in this example is the homoerotic subtext, which is always sort of present. But here in particular, for example, the man says to his sweetheart, believing she's a male sailor, says, well, you look like my sweetheart back at home, and if I ever live to go on shore and she be dead whom I adore, I will your true companion be, and never forsake your company. If she be dead, this will I do, all female sex I'll bid adieu. So quite interesting. Next, well, I won't go into detail with the other ones, just a few comments. The next one is actually, it's also Douce Ballads 322A. 122A. That's just an example of a typical ballad about a highwayman. There are many ballads about highwaymen and highwaywomen, and this was a very popular one. And then next we have The Good Man of Auchter Muchty, which I think is a Scottish ballad. It's also written in a Scottish dialect, I suppose. And it's about a farmer who trades roles with his wife for a day. So he does the household chores and she works in the field. So it's also about a sort of a gender reversal of gender roles. And then we have the Berkshire tragedy, or the Wittam Miller, which is a typical example for a hanging ballad about criminals who were executed and hanged, and these ballads were sold at the execution or afterwards or even before. And it's interesting because this one also mixes in some elements from the typical ballads about tragic marriages, and it's set in Oxford, and it shows us, gives us some insight into the judicial system of the time, the process and everything is described in much detail. Then at the very end over there is the Lamentable Ballad of the Tragical End of a Gallant Lord and Virtuous Lady. It's a rather gruesome ballad, but it's interesting because it portrays a person of color. And last but not least, we'd have to go back to Wood 401. Just more out of fun, I included a ballad which is not about an outsider, quite the opposite, but it is a typical example for a news ballad. It's on the coronation of Charles II, and I thought you might be interested in comparing this to the coronation of Charles III. Just as an example, the glittering train of dukes and earls in glittering gold and costly pearls, with knights and squires attend we see upon his grace of courage free. So not much has changed, I suppose. Yeah, feel free to have a look at these ballads, and keep in mind, ballads were always considered low literature, and it's one of these funny things that many educated readers traditionally looked down on them, but at the same time were drawn to them, probably enjoyed reading them, but were always a bit ashamed of it and needed to relativize their interest. So Sir William Cornwallis, for example, admits that he read ballads, but then got rid of them quickly. He says, "My custom is to read these and presently to make use of them, for they lie in my privy. And when I come thither and have occasion to employ it, I read them half aside at once, for once is my ordinary, which when I have read, I use in that kind that waste paper is most subject to, but should cleanly a profit." Luckily, not all ballads were used in that manner. So, thanks to a couple of foresighted collectors, we have still many ballads and can enjoy them today. So please have a look, and if you have any questions, then feel free to ask. Thank you.